Lab 6, bonus ideas. There are so many possibilities that I'm just going to make some up at random and race through them. Then you can watch this if you want, now or later, neither or both. So I'm going to assume that you've got Lab 5 patched up, a simple 2 oscillator, 1 filter sound into the VCA, and you've got the sequencer playing. And, whether it's with 8 or 16 stages through the switch and taking gates not from the keyboard, but from something that's sending gates along with it. So it's not droning. Okay. So let's just start talking things that you could do. At the moment, you've got the pitch output into a mult, and then these mult outputs are feeding your 2 audio oscillators, and you're bringing your output from your sequencer into the add input. So here's one thing you could do. You could come into a slew limiter, then out of the slew limiter into the mult. So now you can put slew on the pitch voltage going to both of your oscillators. Something that can be even more fun is leave it the way it was, and let's say that you're using these 2 oscillators. It doesn't matter which ones. Say you're doing this. So this is your Lab 5 patch with your 2 oscillators, or you could be using whatever. You could take, say, one of them, probably the higher tuned one would be better, and instead of coming out of the mult, come into the slew limiter, so you're only putting glide on one oscillator. But you'll also notice that there are 2 slew limiters, so you could, if you wanted, come on, doop doop, you know what's coming, right? Is you could come out of the mult, each mult into a slew limiter, and then out of each slew limiter to an oscillator. You could tune them the same instead of an octave apart, and then put upwards glide on one and downwards glide only on the other. Here's another idea. You could take any of these gate outputs, or if you're using the sequential switch, this is interesting. These say trigger outputs, but they're not. They're gates. So it's the opposite of the quantizer. On the sequential switch, if stage 1 is active, that trigger stage 1 is 5 volts high the whole time stage 1 is active. So if you were using the sequential switch, you could, for example, take one of those gate outs and plug it into the control input. Now, when stage 2 of the sequential switch is on, so you're hearing row 2, this oscillator would have glide. But when it goes back to stage 1, this would turn off. You could take, if you were using 2 slew limiters, you could take the 2 gate outputs from the 2 stages of the switch, so that row 1 you would have glide on only one oscillator, and row 2 glide only on another. So many things you could do. You could also take individual stage outputs so that only certain stages have glide on it. Okay? Here's another idea you can get a lot of mileage out of. Your normal Lab 5 patch, you're coming out of a mixer that has 2 oscillators, and you're coming into the audio input of a filter, and out of that into a VCA, off to your speakers, right? Well, the mixer has 2 outputs, or you could mult this, and you could come in to another filter. You could come into a different filter. You come into the Mank. And then you could take any of these. These are all outputs. You could take any one you want. And you could do this. And now this would actually not be modulating. So you would want to take, at this point, maybe you're taking, the gate out from wherever. Say you're taking the gate out from here. And you've got 2 envelope generators being fed. This is already feeding this envelope generator for this filter, and it's feeding this envelope generator for your VCA. But now you have another filter. You have 4 envelope generators here, or 2 4-stage, and another identical module here, and you've got a voltage controllable envelope generator here. So you could come in to, say, this envelope generator. These are bipolar outputs, positive and negative. You use the positive one, damn it. So that took away my audio coming from the filter. I should learn. Okay. You could modulate here. You've got 2 unattenuated modulation inputs and 1 input with an attenuator. Now you can set the attack, decay, release, and sustain at the bottom. It's not ADSR, it's ADRS. And it acts different than a 109. You might not like it at first because it responds differently. The front panel printings of the times aren't actually accurate, so use your ears. And it responds. It has different curved shapes than the 109. And at first I didn't like it. Then I really enjoyed the fact that it's different. You can get very different sounds with it. So now you can make a composite sound. But, you've still got the same gate pattern firing both the envelope generator for this filter and the envelope generator for this filter. So why not instead do something like, take gate 1 only for firing 1 envelope generator. No, I'm going to change it. Let's take the normal every note firing directly into this envelope. No, you need the VCA as well. So we're going to come here. This is your Lab 5, what I'm doing right now. If you're getting confused, just go away. I don't mean that. I mean that I'm working hard to try to help you. So now let's ignore this and ignore this. All right. You've got an second audio path into this filter and an audio output, which you can take any one you want. You're hearing them both equally. We want to fire this with a different pattern. And I'm thinking one of the things that could be very cool is only firing it once every 8 steps because it's voltage controllable. So now you make a setting and you could do something like make a rough setting, take this triangle out of this simple LFO into the overall modulation input, make it slow, and that will be modulating a different amount. You'll need a lot of release time turned up on this to hear it. Another thing that you could do, if you want to start getting a little more elaborate, is you could, for instance, you could take this gate 1 output, which is going directly here, and I mentioned in a different video, I always mult the gate 1 output because there's so many things you can do with it. So now gate 1 is firing VCFEG number 2, the envelope generator for the second filter. But I also have a gate 1 out. Why don't we take that into the shift input of the second 960? Now, pause for a minute. How do you get these to play in sync? You want this one to start on stage 1 when this one goes to stage 1, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then every time it comes back to stage 1, this will shift. It will. It has to with this patch. But how do you get them to start together? And the answer is very simple. Take the stage 9 come to rest stage output and plug it into the stage 9 input. So now every time you call stage 9 to stop this sequencer, this will call stage 9. And then every time you hit play, this one will immediately trigger stage 1. This will go to stage 1, but it'll hold there for 8 steps. And then, so this is going so slow. This is going, and this is going, that you can change these range switches at least to ×2 or ×4. And you can take, say, 1 row out into, let's modulate, I don't know, the attack time, right? And then different knob settings for each time this goes through would be a different amount of time for that to open up. Isn't that something? And then you would still have 2 additional rows left. So I know I'm getting crazy elaborate. No, I'm not. This is actually not at all elaborate. This is still simple subtractive synthesis. Okay. I'm thinking now, why don't we also have some vibrato? So I've got this LFO right here, and I would make it triangle wave and fairly fast, like, 7 hertz, 8 hertz, 6 hertz, something like that. And I'm going to say that I'm going to want to do pitch modulation on one of the oscillators, but I want to control when we hear it. So let's take the output of this into another VCA. You've got a VCA here, but you also have 4 of them right here. So I'm going to use this one. Here's VCA number 1 input. Here's VCA number 1 output. I think it's that jack. And into the linear frequency in. Now, when you turn up this initial gain control, it will be just like turning this one up. So you would turn this all the way up, and then this would control the amount of LFO coming in here. So far, so good? Can you see what's coming? So now, turn this all the way down. You're not hearing any vibrato. And take the outputs of one of these rows, say row 2. And you're going to want to set that to ×2 or ×4. Bring that into the control voltage input and turn up the control voltage attenuator here. Now, for each set of 8 steps, each one of these, row 2 will set how much of the LFO is modulating here. So far, so good? Now, but wait a minute. What if you said, hey, I want to actually change the LFO speed as well? What would you do? You would need a voltage controllable LFO. This one isn't. It's a simple LFO, which for a lot of times you don't need to tie up a whole huge module just to get a simple vibrato. That's why I bought it. It's great. I wish I don't have one of those, and I wouldn't mind one because it's very, very handy with the mult in the bottom. Okay. So what if instead of using this LFO, let's say you were using these 2 oscillators for your audio. You still have one here that's an LFO, but it's fully voltage controlled. So let's take the selectable waveform output here that you can go click, 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 and change the LFO wave. And this is now feeding in this exact same patch. Just by doing that, we still have the same thing here, except we can randomly change the waveform. You will put that in low rate. Put a knob marker in there for you. Yeah, you want that down and low and probably not too fast, right? But now you could take your 3rd row output and bring this into either the linear frequency or the exponential frequency. You're going to want to use one of these because they have attenuators, so you can change how much this row globally is making your rate change. Last thing, and it's your fault if you're still watching, and I could keep going. I hope you understand that. What if we also took out, say, 3 outputs, say a falling ramp and some others, and we can come into, say, another sequential switch. So I'm taking additional LFO outputs here of a falling ramp and a rising ramp. And since we've got a 3rd input and we're using this for control voltage, let's also take a square wave. Pulse output. So now we have got the same LFO that's modulating this at different rates, and we can take this out and do anything we want with it. So why don't we bring this into, I'll tell you what, let's do this. The output of the envelope generator right now, here, is coming into the Mankato 3rd modulation input, which has an attenuator. Let's take it and put it in one of the first 2, which are unattenuated. But then, folks, this knob right here will manually act as an attenuator. So even if you're not putting a control voltage in here, if you turn this knob down, it'll have less and less effect. So, and now we've freed up the input that can be attenuated. So we'll take the output of these 3 LFO waveforms and come in here into the attenuated input. You can turn this up a little bit. Now we can shift this. We could shift it from a series of gates, or how about this, guys? How about this? Hold on a second. you could take individual gate outs from either sequencer, like say this one. Oh, damn it. You'll remember where that cable was. And you could manually call any specific stage on any specific step. And remember, this is going real slow, once for every 8 of these. Can you see? We haven't even scratched the surface. I swear we haven't. So for those few of you, one of you, none of you, I don't know, that's actually watching this whole thing, the idea is experiment. Have fun. Some people, it's not your thing. But the people that enjoy this and experiment often gain the force. And the very worst thing that happens is you have fun. That's the worst. It can also lead to very interesting things. I'm just checking the time here. So there you go, more than you wanted to know for a bonus video.